Good morning. My name is Vanessa Steeram, and I'm a PPC, and I'm supported in this presentation by my colleague Rachel Marsden. What I'm going to be doing is taking you through the portfolio top tips effectively from the PPC perspective, as an experienced PPC myself, but also from the assessor's perspective, which is a collection of observations and indeed discussions with one or two assessors to get an idea of what the key learning points are. And then towards the end, I'm going to hand over to Rachel, who's going to tell you a little bit about what it's like to be working towards accreditation. And indeed, she wants to share what it's like to be a newly accredited mediator. We'd appreciate that. Okay, right. Starting from that, we've got our first slide, which is starting work on your portfolio. I hope you can all see that. I think it's important at the outset to allow yourself dedicated time. And I think what I'm really meaning by that is don't just find a few minutes here and there when you've just got a bit of a gap between various pieces of work that you might be doing, because it's very difficult to actually get your head around it if you do that. But again, you know, it might very well be that that's the only approach you can take, but I do think it's important to try and give it that attention that it needs. Read the guidance documents. Again, I think you need to give them a bit of focus just so that you can get your head around them. And obviously as well, start to collect bits of practice that you've actually undertaken, maybe bits of evidence that you think you want to use. So start, as soon as you start doing any practice, regard it as an evidence collecting opportunity, and indeed store it and keep it in whatever way best works for you. Again, I think it is very much personal preference. Some people like to have a file, paper file. Some people obviously like to keep it stored on their computer. Whatever works for you, I think is important. And I think the next thing is to actually engage your PPC early on in terms of what you're really looking from them. Look, I'm sorry, I've gone on to another one to go back. What you're actually wanting from in terms of the type of support. It's difficult for PPCs to necessarily be available to give you the learning experiences, which is effectively the cases, but they certainly should be there to help you through your portfolio. And I'd engage them early on to identify what your main needs are and what they really can do to help you at this stage. And again, going over the issue of, well, it's about practice development, and it's really important that you see that as a positive, and that indeed you might be learning from some of your mistakes as you're going on, and try and embrace that journey. Now, the next slide is about the competencies. I think the competencies initially can look rather overwhelming, but I think it's important, go back to those, to actually become familiar with them, to read through them, and then actually, even with your PPC, take a bit of time to actually understand what they mean to you. I mean, just glancing at them, I mean, there is one which is C85, which is about managing strong emotions and conflict sufficiently to allow mediation process to move forward. I think some of these ones, you do need to sort of get your head around them a bit. And I think that's when you have a discussion with your PPC. And indeed, sometimes people like to get into a buddying arrangement with someone else who they know is doing their portfolio, so that you get an understanding of what that might mean. Again, that's moved on to really starting to identify what evidence meets which competence as soon as you can. And even though it's wise to not over evidence, it is also important that in certain of the competencies, I think you do need to evidence things more than once. There is the C7.1, which basically bundles together quite a few of the competencies, quite a few of the bits of mediation practice that I think is difficult to actually just say, well, I'll just do it once. So don't be worried about repeating those. And record all the competencies that you have met against the evidence. Case commentaries. That's not to say that other pieces of the portfolio aren't equally as relevant, but I think the case commentaries are a great opportunity for you to showcase your work. Check that they're in the timescales. You can use a piece of work, a case that might be maybe slightly old if it was a particularly good one for a variety of reasons. It might be that we were in lockdown and that was a particularly good piece of work that you did face to face. I don't think you need to worry too much about that, but you do need to explain why in your introduction for your portfolio that this was a particularly good piece of work or something that you wanted to use. And I think that's probably going to then meet the assessor's requirements. You can use 4 cases rather than 3 if you haven't got an aim case. It's a bit more flexible now. The case commentaries are more about the reader understanding what you're thinking and reflecting on. So it isn't just a simple description of what you've done. It's actually the assessor who's reading it, get an understanding of what you're thinking about, what you're feeling, what influences what you actually do in mediation. And again, I think it's important for you to try and get used to thinking like that. So if you're having an example, let's say, where there is a bit of conflict around and you're picking up on their body language, to then make an intervention and say, do we need to stop there and discuss further, is actually what you were thinking and feeling was noticing their body language and knowing that if you ignored their body language, that might impact on the process of the mediation. So that's just a little example. So if you can try and get used to thinking of it in that way, I think it'll assist you in doing the case commentaries. And again, stating what I've just already said, which is what influenced your thinking and your actions. So this brings me on to underpinning knowledge. I mean, nobody comes to mediation as a blank piece of paper. They'll bring their own experience. They'll bring something from their background about their values and beliefs. And interestingly enough, it doesn't mean beware. It means be aware of them, be conscious of what you bring, and don't feel in any way sort of guilty and apologetic about it, because it's all relevant in terms of your journey and your progress towards being an accredited mediator. I think it's also important to know how you learn. We all have slightly different learning styles, and I think it's important that you have a bit of an idea of how you do that. And what floats your boat, basically, in the process. Use reflective logs. Again, it's very much a personal preference. Some people like to keep these because they're an aid memoir when it comes to actually writing up cases. Don't think you're going to remember everything, because I can absolutely assure you, you think you're going to, and then it comes to it later on, you've forgotten it, and you're rather irritating yourself for not taking some more detailed notes. So always write whatever happens down, even if it's a handwritten note. And then read. It's a great opportunity on this journey to embrace the process of your own development, and reading is part of that. So what should you be reading? Again, I've tried to look at reading effectively being divided up into a number of different, I suppose, headings. One is about mediation specific materials, and we've got some very good books around. Lisa Parkinson, Tony Watling. I mean, you would appreciate the comments that they make, their views, their wisdom, and so I would definitely get along and have a look at some of their work. I think to broaden it out, it's important to look at the self-reflection stuff, which is about your learning styles, and these are all people you can access on the internet, Cole, the Honey and Mumford, and the Business Balls, where you can just actually just have a look at that and get an idea of what that means to you. There's some more specific journals, indeed, and also books on conflict management. And the one that immediately comes to mind is Fisher and Urey, which is Getting to Yes. There's a particular chapter in that I'm very fond of, which is trying to help people consider their interests and not get stuck in considering their positions. So again, you can dip in and out of that. That's very easily available on the internet. reading that enhances your understanding, that is understanding of human growth and development, understanding what people's experiences are, what happens to them when they're traumatized, upset, maybe what happens to them when they're a child, or their early experiences might impact on who they are now and how they're behaving. And I think that's relevant in terms of understanding people's behavior. And then the next sort of reading is about how can you, as a mediator, develop your skills? And of course, all our skills are assisted by understanding things better. But then there are also things that you can improve on, I think it's fair to say, around reading. People like solution-focused brief therapy, so that they're about intervention skills. So how do you actually develop those skills in terms of intervening with people better? And then, of course, there's always being well informed about family law and practice developments. Now, the next thing, I think, the most important other bit after the case comment is a reflective account. This is your opportunity, effectively, to collect together those things you either want to showcase again, or that you feel that you haven't had an opportunity of properly going through in your case commentaries. So again, start writing some notes for your reflective account of things that you think, well, that went well, or that didn't go so well. And I want to talk more about that a little bit later. Okay, and then you can pull those things into your reflective account. So there again, it's about where you are in terms of your own development journey. I'll come back to that at the end, really, because it is about how you progress as a mediator. It isn't actually being fully formed from the outset. It's about how you actually progress, develop, what sort of things have helped you become a more confident mediator. I think you can record interesting events, something that specific happens, and it's really important, particularly around safeguarding or in diversity, of capturing those opportunities that might not necessarily happen in every session that you run. And also in the reflective account, identifying what your future needs might be. So, okay, on to how the assessor might view your portfolio. Besides some of the things that I've already mentioned, these are the things that I've just tried to capture from the assessor's perspective that maybe are just additional points that you might want to remember. It's important to make it easy for the assessor to read the portfolio. And if they're hunting backwards and forwards, it does actually put them off a little bit. Now, that's not saying you're here just to keep them happy, but I think if you're able to number and even colour things in a certain way so that they're able to follow it, I think you'll find that they'll approach the portfolio in a much more cheerful way, which always helps. I think it's important that you refer to reading materials. I think there are some assessors who say that they've read an entire portfolio where there's been no mention of underpinning knowledge and what they've read. And actually, that just brings me to something that I'd want to mention. We are running a series in 2021, that's this year, of events for mediators working towards accreditation. And one of them is actually about how you use underpinning knowledge. So that might be something you'd want to consider. But it is important that you mention things that you've read. Important that you anonymize all documents. That is actually surprisingly something that doesn't always happen 100%. So that's when your partner or kind friend comes in handy, because they can glance through it to make sure that you haven't actually made any mistakes. Because the evidence should include letters. Obviously, they need to be properly anonymized. The MIAM, flips, charts, notes, and the memorandum and the open summary. It shouldn't include bank statements, house valuations, mortgage and salary slips and things like that. So just be careful that they're not included. And again, the MOU should contain reasoning about how you've reached the conclusions that you've reached and the proposals that you've actually come to within the memorandum of understanding. Okay, so don't think you just highlight the actual decision, give them some idea of how you've actually got there. Now, I think that I probably just want to go back because I'm not sure whether or not I can, but there we go. Right, okay, so there we go. That's as far as we're able to actually reach at this point without Rachel's helpful comments. So I'm going to ask Rachel now to talk a little bit about what it's like to be a newly qualified mediator.
Okay, thank you, Vanessa. I appreciate some of what I'm now going to say will sort of overlap with things that Vanessa has said, but they are really important tips that certainly I found helpful on my journey. The first thing is I would suggest that you do put sufficient time aside to dedicate to your portfolio. It is an extremely time-consuming process. I appreciate it's difficult for us all to put time aside with our busy lives and other commitments. However, I found it really important to allocate that time so that I could focus solely on the portfolio and try to minimize any distractions. I would suggest that you try and plan how and in what order you tackle your portfolio. Everyone will have a different way of dealing with this. Rather than trying to do the whole portfolio at once, I found it really helpful to try and focus on one part of the portfolio at a time. And I find that this not only helped me focus on each section as I was doing it, but it also helped me not to feel completely overwhelmed with the amount of work that was required. And also it gave me a sense of achievement and a bit of a boost when I finished each section of the portfolio. When preparing the case commentaries, I found it really helpful to physically divide my pages into two halves. And on the left-hand side, I detailed what I said and what I did, my actions. And on the right-hand side, I explained the thinking behind my actions. And as part of the portfolio, it is really important to underpin what's behind your thinking. Your reflective account is a great way to display the skills that you've not had opportunity to showcase in the rest of your portfolio. If you choose not to prepare this as your last document within your portfolio, I would certainly recommend that you visit it at the end, because you can then go through all of your skills to make sure everything is covered within that. I'd say a really important tip is to read, and read some more. Not only does this increase your knowledge, it helped give me an understanding of understanding the thinking behind my actions. When I first started the accreditation process, I found it very difficult to put into words why I was doing certain actions and saying certain things. And I found that as my knowledge increased and the research, that made it more understandable for me. I would suggest that you don't underestimate the importance of preparing your reflective logs throughout the accreditation process after every mediation session. Although you might not need these for your actual case summaries, you may find that you need those for other stages of your portfolio process, such as your reflective log or your questions. I appreciate Vanessa's covered this one. I would say don't be afraid of including things that haven't worked well for you during your sessions within your portfolio. We're not expected to know everything or get everything right. And this is a learning journey, and we all do make mistakes. Personally, some of my most valuable learning has actually been from things that didn't work well during meetings. And my advice is that the important thing is that you're able to reflect on what hasn't worked well in a session and consider what you could have done or what you would do differently if that similar or the same situation arose, to give a more positive outcome in the future. I would suggest that in your portfolio you include skills that you've acquired throughout your personal and working life outside of mediation, if these skills have either helped you or presented challenges throughout your mediation journey. To give an example, I was originally from a legal background, and I found that I had already developed skills such as active listening and summarising, which were extremely helpful for the portfolio process. However, one of my challenges was initially I found it difficult to take off my solicitor's hat and to resist the urge to advise people. And I included this in my portfolio, and a great place to put this information is in your reflective account. And just finally, my final tip is to try and embrace the portfolio process. The portfolio is far from easy, and you may have times that you feel very overwhelmed with it, or question whether you can actually complete it. I know I certainly had those moments. But to become accredited, you just have to show that you have a sufficient level of competence. You're not expected to be an expert in mediation. And the portfolio process is the start of what hopefully will be a fulfilling learning journey for you. So my final words are to keep going. It will definitely be worth it. Thank you.
You, Rachel. Okay, so here we go. Off you go. And have a great journey. And we may very well meet you on the way. So thank you very much for listening, and all the best in this process. Okay, bye-bye then.
Bye.